There are a lot of diets out there, but do any of them work? There's one that I use a lot in my practice called the intermittent fasting diet. So I've invited a top expert on weight management to help you do this diet in the healthiest way possible. So I'm here with Dr. Julita Mitchell, who's a board-certified primary care physician and also board-certified in integrative medicine, and she runs the Integrative Weight Management Program at the Marcus Institute. Welcome, Dr. Mitchell.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
So today I really wanted to delve into diets that work, because so many times in my practice, people are like, I've tried being on the low-carb diet, I've tried being on this diet, I've tried being on that diet, and what happens is they lose some weight, or they do one of these commercial sort of weight loss diets that, there's membership fees and things like that, or they'll have food sent to them, and they lose some weight, and then they gain it back, sometimes even more. And so I know from, my integrative medicine background, we want to get them to change their lifestyle, but sometimes people need more than that. They need sort of a jump start, and they want to try it without the drugs first. So one of the diets I'd love to hear more about from you is the intermittent fasting diet, because I've seen great data, I've seen great things with some of my patients, but you as our weight loss expert, I'd love to hear your opinion on it.
Intermittent fasting is a great option for many people, but not all. Essentially, what intermittent fasting is cutting out calories or food intake within a certain period of time. And this can be done in many different ways. I think most popularly, this is actually done as time-restricted eating, meaning that you're limiting your eating window to a certain period of time during the day. This can be as simple as an overnight fast. This can be a 12-hour fasting window. Or, as it's most studied in the medical research, a 16-hour fast period and an 8-hour eating period. So when I'm talking about intermittent fasting with most of my patients, I really try to aim for that 16-8 ratio.
Now, do you have success with that 16-8 ratio? Because a lot of times I find I have to restrict that window.
I do. It depends on the patient. It depends on their starting metabolism.
And their age.
Correct. How do you see it manifest with different ages?
I find that the older the person is, the tighter the window, because they're in a more metabolically slowed state. And so sometimes that has to be a pretty small window, like 5 hours, 6 hours. To get the weight loss that they're really looking for. Yes,
this is a customizable diet or approach. I find one of the potential pitfalls in prescribing intermittent fasting is really people wanting to start it too fast, too soon. And so I think a gradual approach makes the most sense.
Like starting with an 8-hour eating window, and if they need to tighten it, they tighten it to where it needs to go.
Exactly. That leads to more sustainable changes, and it also limits this restriction mindset, which I really don't want my patients to have. I want them to think about how they're nourishing their body and not how they're restricting their body.
Let's talk a little bit more about why it works and whether or not it's healthy.
Intermittent fasting works by increasing metabolic flexibility. Okay, so what does that mean? When you fast for a period of time, your body is actually able to use a different fuel source for its everyday processing, right? So instead of using, let's say, primarily glucose, which comes primarily from carbohydrates, if you fast for a period of time, you're able to shift that energy source to something called ketones. And your body is still able to carry out its functions. However, you're tasking your body in using different fuel sources, which makes it more efficient at doing that over time.
So during the fasting period, during that 16 plus hours, over time, as you get probably close to the end of those 16 hours, your body utilizes its glucose stores and then starts to mobilize fat stores, and that's the ketone bodies you're talking about.
Exactly. And that's the metabolic flexibility that we want as a result of intermittent fasting.
And are there health benefits beyond mobilizing fat to being on that kind of a diet?
There are. From my experience, intermittent fasting, when done right, is one of the quickest, most efficient ways to reverse insulin resistance. I'm not talking about frank diabetes here, but more of this pre-diabetes range of insulin resistance.
Which is huge. And that might be why in animal models and some early human studies that calorie restriction, fasting, intermittent fasting, actually has a positive effect on even things like tumor markers.
Yes. Intermittent fasting mobilizes a process called autophagy. And autophagy is the process of clearing cellular debris or cellular garbage. Right? If we do this over time, then we're decreasing inflammation and decreasing this potential cascade that can lead to things like tumor growth, for example.
Now, how long should people be on an intermittent fasting diet?
There's research being done on that, and we don't quite know yet. However, the research that does exist points to this being able to be done for a 12-month period of time safely.
And what's your experience with patients in terms of what does the weight loss look like for those? Because most people doing it are trying to lose some weight. And so what do you notice? What's your experience with that?
One of the things that I notice is inches shed from the middle area. Intermittent fasting is great at mobilizing visceral fat or central fat. And so I have patients come back and say, hey, listen, my clothes fit better. And this doesn't always correlate with a drop in pounds, for example, but it does correlate with a drop in body fat.
So are there any pitfalls or things to worry about when you put somebody on an intermittent fasting diet?
There are. One of the pitfalls that I see commonly is not paying attention to quality nutrition during your eating phase. That's still critically important. I ask my patients to think about high protein, high fiber, high quality fat during that eating period. We don't want to bring on any micronutrient deficiencies. And so it's important to think about quality nutrition during that, let's say, 8-hour eating window.
Right, because if it's just a free-for-all of all the bad food, when they finally go off of the intermittent fasting diet, they're just kind of go back to what they were. So can you tell us a little more about the dietary recommendations you have for people when they're in the window?
So I recommend people to eat a Mediterranean-style diet, okay? The Mediterranean diet is really the most researched anti-inflammatory whole foods diet that we have. And the evidence on it is actually really profound. We see the Mediterranean diet have positive impact on cardiovascular health, metabolic health, cognitive and brain health, even things like aging and cancer risk. And so I always have patients start with the Mediterranean diet as a foundation. Once we reach a Mediterranean diet style of eating, then we can make further adjustments to help them reach their goals.
So in a way, you're really combining two diets that have proven health benefits to maximize not only weight loss, but healthy weight loss.
That's right.
Now, one of the things I find when I put somebody on an intermittent fasting diet is that it feels daunting at first. I can't eat for this period of time. But I would say most people, within a relatively short period of time, don't mind the window anymore. Do you see that?
I do, and I think that's because of the hormonal shifts that are happening after a period of intermittent fasting. We know that, again, insulin sensitivity is more likely when you fast for periods of time. And so the less insulin that we have, the more we're able to mobilize fat stores, the less carb cravings we have. And so people are ultimately able to do this, for months and months as their hormonal situation improves.
That explains another phenomenon that I see, which is once they get in the rhythm of the intermittent fasting diet, the window that they're eating starts to become more controlled. So I almost don't even worry that much about cheat foods and things like that in the initial phase of the intermittent fasting diet, just getting them used to the window. And then once they're used to the window, I find it's easier to get them to adhere to those Mediterranean diet principles that you've taught me are so important for people to adhere to in the window.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. One of the things I believe is underlying that phenomenon is the fact that hunger hormones are being adjusted in a positive way with intermittent fasting. So with this style of eating, again, we see a reduction in the hunger hormone ghrelin and an increase in the satiety hormone leptin. And so that's exactly what the change that we need in order to help curb cravings and overeating.
That really makes sense from some of the things we've seen in recent studies that show that being on an intermittent fasting diet has direct immune correlations that might be positive for long-term health and longevity.
Yes. Again, I think that goes back to the hormonal shifts and then the anti-inflammatory changes that we see with intermittent fasting.
And the other thing that's so important that you and I have talked about before is having a healthy gut and having a healthy gut microbiome. So the intermittent fasting itself, I believe, has some direct correlations to that gut microbiome. And then when you're having people eat the nutrient, fiber-rich foods of the Mediterranean diet during the window, you're really giving yourself a double benefit.
That's right. Microbiome changes that eating a high fiber diet directly changes your microbes, and the beneficial microbes that we see enhanced in a high fiber diet directly change our hormonal expression, and they improve metabolism. And so this style of eating, again, circles back to make these changes more sustainable.
So you're giving the digestive system this window to sort of like regulate itself better by not having food. Mm-hmm. And then when you put the right kind of nutritive food in the mix, you're really healing the gut in many ways.
That's right.
And when you have like a healthy functioning gut, you're going to lose weight and maintain optimal weight, all the better.
Yeah, you're going to have less cravings. You're going to actually start craving those healthy foods. That's one of the changes that I see often by making small, incremental, positive changes. The brain actually starts craving those going forward. People's taste buds change. In fact, one of the changes that I see in my clinical practice often is that when people implement these changes, slowly, their taste buds actually change, and they begin to crave foods that are healthier, that are lower in sugar, lower in fat, and lower in calories. And so that's the best case scenario that I want to see.
Well, all of this together really underscores why this has been a proven solution for a lot of people. Now, one question I sometimes get is whether or not people should be considering these newer weight loss drugs that I know you're an expert in while on an intermittent fasting diet. What are your thoughts about that?
The combination is not always recommended. As standalone approaches, absolutely. When you couple time-restricted eating and these medications, sometimes the appetite suppression that you see is enough to make it difficult to reach appropriate protein intake, fiber intake, etc.
All within a short window.
Correct. So I see more deficiencies, both micro and macronutrient, when you couple intermittent fasting and these medications.
I imagine for a future conversation, you're going to tell me that you probably couple those Mediterranean dietary principles with those drugs.
Oh, yes. That is a proven combination.
Great. Well, we'll make sure that we talk about that, but this was really a wonderful conversation about a diet that's out there and really seems to be a solution for many people, the intermittent fasting diet. Dr. Julita Mitchell, as always, pleasure. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.